since the time is now 12 o'clock, I'll officially welcome all of you to the program today. My name is Jen Tabina, and I'm a museum educator here at the National Museum of the United States Army. And I am joined today by Kevin Bryant, who is a park ranger at the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site in Washington, D.C. He has worked for the National Park Service for 7 years, spending the last 5 at the Douglass home. He is a native of Illinois and holds 2 master's degrees and is a frequent guest on documentaries, podcasts, and all things related to Frederick Douglass. So I don't think we could have a better person here today to talk to us about Frederick Douglass and looking at Frederick Douglass's role with contraband and the U.S. Army and that path towards citizenship. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
To get us started and to kick us off, who is Frederick Douglass and why would we be talking about him in relationship with the Civil War? Use the microphone if you want.
Sure. So Frederick Douglass, I think, is one of the greatest Americans to have ever lived in the sheer breadth of his journey that he's going to capture. He has 77 years of life. But in relation to where we are harnessing into and talking, Frederick Douglass, though he doesn't know it, is born in 1818. He's born into a state of slavery, spends the first 20 years of his life being dehumanized, being assaulted, being abused, being told over and over that he is just a piece of property, that he is a thing, that he is not a human being. He knows that is ridiculous, and he is going to spend those 20 plus years battling for full recognition of not only who he is, but for the very dismantlement of the system of slavery. And when he is able to finally self-emancipate himself in 1838, when he's 20 years old, Frederick Douglass is going to make it his life's mission to not just say, I made it, I'm out of slavery, this is fantastic. He's going to do everything he can to guarantee that system will be left in ashes after him. And that future generations, hopefully, will not have to experience not only that legal institution, but threads of it that would be coming beyond that point. So he escapes, self-emancipates when he's about 20 years old, spends from that point forward, 1838, until ultimately his death in 1895, trying desperately to craft a better America, trying to challenge every single politician, every single powerful organization, every single church or theological structure he can find, trying to challenge all of them for their complicity in making these systems possible. And for us, this becomes most abundantly clear during the outbreak of the Civil War, when these moments begin to dawn. By that point in time, Frederick Douglass is in his mid-40s. He has done a ton of stuff. He is world famous before the Civil War already busts out. He's traveled the globe 2 different times previous to this moment. And now this, as he sees it, is one of our great opportunities to make major change happen. Because he's gone on a long journey over these decades that have taken him from these chains to the point where he's going to be meeting with President Lincoln and others. And on this journey, Frederick has explored pacifism as a way. He's explored the idea that if we vote, we're endorsing systems of politics, so that can't be the right way. And now, through the later 1850s, Frederick is very convinced that maybe what it takes, if we're going to dismantle slavery, is we need some dead enslavers. We need some blood to flow freely across the continent. And perhaps America is never going to come to terms with this sin that is inflicted without tremendous amount of bloodshed. And so for Douglass, moving into the later 1850s, as we get closer and closer to what you and I know is coming in the next few pages of history, Douglass is ready for some violence. And he is looking very much forward to violence. Not that he rejoices in people suffering, but he rejoices in hopefully the political upheaval this might be able to create and move forward on. So Douglass, very primed, very experienced, world famous prior to even those guns firing in Fort Sumter, the Articles of Secession. But that's where we're kind of planting him at this moment in time. He's about 43 years of age when the war is going to start. But again, he doesn't know that. He has no idea how old he is. So he knows he's somewhere in his early 40s. One of the earliest things he's going to write about is speaking of those who had been enslaved, we are not given the privilege of even knowing these basic things such as our birth dates, our years. We know at best the time of year we might have been born. He's fighting not just for his humanity, but recognizing at that point in time, the late 1850s, Frederick Douglass, I think it's safe to say, is the most famous black man in the United States. And he recognizes because of this, as political pressure is coming to an upheaval, whatever the future is going to be having, so many millions of men and women will be looking at him, unfair as it may be, looking at him as representative of millions of others held in states of bondage or freedom and journeying through that course of America. He knows I got a lot riding on my shoulders. And this is a big, big moment, but by no means the first moment in his lives of activism.
Oh, great. So now we know kind of where he is in this lead up to the Civil War. But where exactly do we find him at the start of the Civil War? And can you talk a little bit about Frederick Douglass's connection to John Brown?
Mm-hmm. Yes, John Brown is one of Douglass's old buddies there. John Brown is a militant white abolitionist. He believes very strongly that slavery is a complete evil in this land. And John Brown, much earlier than Douglass, has come to the belief that violence is the path. It has to be violence. Because the whole system of slavery, lest we forget, is completely violent in the way it has exploited and abused and murdered generations of millions of people in this American genocide unfolding around our land. As the war is actually breaking out, though, Douglass and John Brown have had a decade-plus relationship. They first met in 1847. A few allies of Douglass are going to connect him over with John Brown. At this point in time, Douglass has just returned from an exile in Europe. 1845, Frederick Douglass is going to publish his memoir, his life story. And in publishing this, he gives names, he gives dates, he gives locations, he gives enslavers information, all of this stuff that would be necessary to identify who Frederick Douglass really was. Because maybe this isn't common knowledge for some of us, Frederick Douglass is not his real name. I know we've got audience kind of virtual as well as some in person. Is anybody in person or so? And if you're virtual, put it in the chat. Does anybody know what Frederick Douglass's real name was? Douglass is the name he's hiding under once he's escaped through this system. When he is born, he is Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. But he knows, Frederick Bailey knows, when he escapes from this system, the people looking for him are first going to be looking for a Fred Bailey. You can't keep the same names. So he changes all those details to hide. But in 1845, he releases his full life story. This is who I am. This is where I'm from. And these are all the people who were responsible for my bondage, and they're all still alive. So you can go and talk to them. This is a really bold move, but that's a really dangerous move that he does at the same time. It's shining a huge spotlight on this man who is standing on stages. And so Douglass then takes off, crosses the ocean. He goes, it's not safe for me in America right now. Spends 2 years over in the British Isles. And when he comes back in 1847 is when he connects with John Brown for the first time. They spend over a decade having conversations, staying at each other's houses, planning, because both of them recognize slavery is a fundamental evil in the country and it must be destroyed. They don't necessarily agree on how to do it. John Brown floats all sorts of ideas over the years to Frederick Douglass, and he's on board with a lot of what he hears. But John Brown's early ideas are not remotely close to what many of us may be familiar with him ultimately opting to do in 1859. He's fundamentally trying to dismantle the system, but by taking to the mountains, arming a rebellion in the mountains, allowing folks to come participate in this. But in 1859, Douglass has what will become his final meeting with John Brown before these fateful events at Harper's Ferry will play out. And they meet in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania in complete secrecy, both of them using fake assumed names to get together. And Douglass shows up in this town just for his private meeting with John Brown. But Frederick Douglass is world famous. He cannot blend in anywhere. And the citizens recognize him. They, oh, you're here to speak. He was just here to have his private conversation. But very quickly, if I don't speak, alarm bells are going to be ringing everywhere. So Douglass impromptu gives a speech in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, then spends the next 2 days meeting secretly with John Brown, where John Brown reveals his real plan, and it has changed considerably from the last conversation that he had had with Frederick Douglass. This plan to take over a military arsenal in Harper's Ferry, then Virginia, take those weaponry, and hopefully, with Frederick Douglass at his side, hundreds and thousands of enslaved individuals will rally to that, and they'll form their own little army. They're being able to branch forth. Frederick Douglass personally loves this idea, but he fully acknowledges this idea is not going to be successful. We've got the right thinking here, but fundamentally doing this is a suicide mission. You will die going into this. If I go with you, I will die. Everyone who accompanies you is going to die. We cannot possibly succeed. But yet, Douglass opts not to join him, but still says, well, I'm going to keep your story to myself, though. I know you're going to do it, and I'm not going to tell anybody what you're doing. Because you will die, and maybe martyrdom is what this cause needs. The next thing to launch it forward, but Douglass frustrates John Brown by refusing to join him, saying, I'm going to stay back and continue that battle, maybe recognizing if you're going to have a martyr, you might soon need this war propagandist, a guy with a newspaper and other things to take to the stage and elevate that name and that cause. To the frustration of John Brown, they part ways, never to see each other again. But a few weeks later, Frederick Douglass is on stage in Philadelphia when the word comes across the wires of what John Brown has just done in October of 1859. And Frederick Douglass says there was basically this mass panic. He says it was like a bolt of lightning when he learned what happened. And he immediately disappears from Philadelphia because Frederick Douglass knows it's not going to be hard at all to connect me with John Brown. Tons of papers and letters back and forth between us. I brought money and donated to him. That can all be traced. So Frederick Douglass now again is like, uh-oh. John Brown did what is this spark. Hopefully he started this political upheaval in a new way. But I also don't want to go down with him because I knew about it, and even not participating, he's an accomplished. So Frederick Douglass bolts out of town, sends messages back to his family, secure all of my papers, hide everything related to John Brown until I can get there so no one can find it. Gets to his home in Rochester, New York, and then realizes, I got to get off this continent yet again. A warrant has just been issued by the state of Virginia for Frederick Douglass for murder, robbery, and inciting servile insurrection. And Frederick Douglass, though he believes he may have a legal case to kind of fight this, he also has some strange reason to believe he might not get a fair trial in the state of Virginia if he allows himself to go in there. And he's fully aware, innocent as I may be able to prove myself legally, he knows odds are he's going to be swinging right next to John Brown if he goes to that. So as U.S. Marshals are dispatched to Frederick Douglass's house, the message is first sent to a guy who's running the, what's the little clicky thing? I'm forgetting the name. Telegraph, thank you. Yeah, it's better than the clicky thing. Yeah, the telegraph. Message is sent to the telegraph to get these marshals to go to Douglass's house, and the telegraph operator in Rochester, New York, is a close friend of Frederick Douglass. And before he passes that message on to the law enforcement there, he first sends the message to Frederick, get out of here now. I can buy you just a couple minutes before I got to pass this message on. And Frederick vanishes into New York State, eventually getting on that boat, taking a multi-week journey back across the seas in exile, because he is wanted as an accomplice for the work of John Brown. And this takes us through the remainder of 1859 into the early portions of 1860. He spends a few months in exile there, watching, studying, hearing reports of John Brown's ultimate execution, trying to figure out, am I ever going to be able to go home? But pending at this time too, there's a lot of conversation about the new presidents, the election coming up. And focus quickly starts to shift. Congressional investigations into John Brown begin wrapping up, closing things up. Douglass starts to wonder if he might be able to come home to America. And whether he might or not, ultimately the reason that he decides to come back breaks his heart. He's over in England in the spring of 1860 when he gets a devastating letter that informs him his baby girl, 10 years old, has just passed away. She has died back here in the United States. He was not here to be with her. He is never going to miss his family again in that moment, no matter what it might require from him. Hops on a boat, crosses those seas, coming back here. He will miss the funeral, all of those events, but he says he's going to be with his family, no matter what happens. And very quietly, in the spring of 1860, Frederick Douglass returns to find not only personal torment in that recently buried daughter of his, but a nation that very quickly isn't thinking about John Brown nearly as much, because so many different folks are vying for political power in this upcoming election. And keeping a low profile for a while, Frederick Douglass abundantly becomes clear, it's time to get loud again. They're not looking for me anymore. Last thing anybody wants is to talk about John Brown more, but that's exactly what Frederick Douglass wants to talk about, is how we got to this point. And as everybody's starting to crack around the political factions, Frederick Douglass looking saying, we might be at this great turning point in America, but maybe I can help speed that along even with a little bit more political dissension. John Brown weighs big on Frederick Douglass's mind. And I think perhaps more than any other single individual, help motivate Frederick Douglass that violence is what we're going to need here. And honestly, in Frederick Douglass's opinion, the more violent this hopefully coming war is going to be for him, the better our opportunities are to remake America properly this time. So a very tenuous, close relationship with John Brown, but very complicated, very complicated.
Wow. Yes, a very complicated relationship that they have, to say the least. So kind of set the scene coming up to the election of 1860, and you alluded to it a little bit, that there's a lot of tension, not only with this election within the United States, but within Douglass himself. So how did Douglass view this election? And who really, did he have a candidate that he was putting his weight behind? Or was he kind of staying on the outskirts, kind of just stirring the pot amongst them?
Sure. Douglass absolutely has a preferred candidate as the election is rising, but it's perhaps not the candidate that many of us would expect it to be. So there are four main candidates who kind of emerge in the 1860 election, and Douglass isn't personally supporting any of those four. He's going with one of his buddies who's running with a group sometimes called the Radical Abolitionist Party, sometimes the Liberty Party. And he believes that this, what by our standards today we would consider a third party, but I guess in time would be a fifth party that's emerging in here. He says, this party is committed that abolition is the only path. It is calling for the immediate destruction of slavery, which is something that even as Douglass is learning more about this emerging Republican Party and the candidate Abraham Lincoln, they're talking the right sort of direction, but they're not talking the immediacy that is at stake. So Douglass will not ultimately vote for Abraham Lincoln in that 1860 election. But what is guiding him is the realization that, as he consists it, no matter who he votes for, he's firmly convinced Abraham Lincoln is going to win. So he doesn't feel he needs to vote him. He feels, I can vote my priorities. I can vote my morals and my ethics to complete 100% capabilities there because Lincoln is going to win. He's confident in this because the Democratic Party has split at the time between the Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. And as Douglass views it, anything at all that allies the the slavery forces together in something they find an enemy, that's an automatic friend of his cause and the efforts he wants. So even if this Lincoln guy isn't really ideally what I'm hoping for, there are a lot of people scattered across a lot of southern states who are infuriated, terrified, and scared to death of this guy and what he might do if he gets into that office. And that's beautiful from Douglass's point of view. If they all hate that man or what he stands for so much or what he might do so much, this is a best case scenario for us, because anything that terrifies enslavers, Frederick Douglass loves. And therefore, if you're an enemy in their eyes, you're a friend to him. So Douglass is not overly keen on Lincoln, except how Lincoln is polarizing the slavery forces. When he ultimately makes that vote, again, he feels he can vote his conscience because he's confident. And he put several periodicals in the newspaper that Lincoln will be president moving forward. He says, I encourage all to vote for Lincoln. However, he's going to vote his party line for his old reliable, a man named Garrett Smith, who's loved and found very strength. Garrett Smith has been a big funder of Douglass over the years, done a lot of dynamic anti-slavery work. He's no fool. He knows Garrett Smith isn't going to win. He's highly confident Lincoln will. And with that, hopefully, that enemy that many of these southern areas have constructed Lincoln to be is going to speed everything up. And as we meet in the pages of history, it's exactly what happens. Lincoln is elected later that year, and even before he assumes office, even before Lincoln has a chance to do or not do anything, exercising the presidential powers, southern states already begin announcing their leaving, holding these secession conventions, issuing these articles, not even waiting to see what goes on. And this is when Frederick Douglass is all but jumping up and down in joy. Because he had earlier been an advocate of secession of states that wanted to abolish slavery, that we should leave the United States because of that sin that United States government was proposing. And so now if the states that want to maintain that political power of enslavement, if they are voluntarily walking away and threatening violence enough, we couldn't have constructed a better circumstance than this to lash right back out and destroy the very system they're trying to perpetuate once and for all. So he is a supporter of Lincoln, but again, hesitant, not trusting the man as much as he is trusting the opposition to what the man stands for, revealing that the southern states are basically creating this environment that is going to force Lincoln likely to do far more than maybe Lincoln would have. We'll never know for sure. But Douglass is convinced Lincoln's being pushed that direction because states are actively walking away from it. The election of 1860, a major turning point in Douglass's career, and knowing war is coming. And he wants to be the first to be beating on that war drum as loud as he can, saying, if we're going to have a war, we must make sure that black men are allowed to fight in it. That is one of his earliest calls from the very beginning, a call that is not immediately received by the Lincoln administration once the violence and outbreak does begin busting around us.
So if Douglass is jumping for joy at the prospect of states leaving the Union, how does he feel once those first shots are fired at Fort Sumter?
If Douglass was jumping for joy beforehand, and now he's leaping even higher when these guns have actually begun firing. When he gets the report, because again, news moved a little bit slower at the time from where he is. He's up in New York at the time, living in Rochester. When he gets report that the guns have actually fired on Fort Sumter, he completely stops the publication issue that he was working on there and reissues new headlines into that edition, which is celebrating this. Basically, I'm paraphrasing in a modern sense, but fundamentally what he says is, they're so dumb they actually did it. Here's this moment like they actually opened fire, and now therefore it takes away so much of that hesitance of others who may say, I don't want to fire the first shot, I don't want to be the guilty party in this, but if somebody else is actively firing on a federal installation, he's saying it's going to force Lincoln to act and get off of that negotiating table. This is time to go. But again, it's time to go as long as Lincoln recognizes what the true cause of the war is. And as Frederick Douglass is concerned, Lincoln is not willing to recognize the true cause of the war, being the fundamental existence of human enslavement and bondage in the United States of America. Lincoln is still articulating this idea that it's about holding the Union together, preservation of the Constitution. It's these questions, legal questions of secession and issues of uniting all of the nation back together because of political differences. So Frederick Douglass says, yes, we've got there. But this is only the first step, because if we don't take intentional efforts to include slavery in all of its aspects as a military aim, we're still missing the boat here. So sometimes this term gets received unfavorably, but I don't think it's too hard to say at all. From 1861 to 1862, Frederick Douglass is a war propagandist in this nation. He is putting out material, and again, don't receive that in the wrong way, as in not all propaganda is bad in that respect. His cause is that the propaganda that he is wanting to put out, grounded in truth, is that slavery is at the core of everything that is happening and everything that has been happening for years in American existence previous to this. And if the government is going to try to fight this war, pretending that's not the central cause of it, then I need to use the mouthpiece that I have, being multiple newspapers that he is actively publishing, and being stages that this man is on almost every single day across those years. He is going to center the role of slavery in all of this. And for Frederick Douglass, the really cool thing that he is able to do for us, because he's talking and writing about the war in real time, Frederick Douglass is essentially live blogging the Civil War as it is unfolding all around him, not later going back in memory and putting these things and saying, this is what we need right now, and this is what I see. Okay, Fort Donelson has fallen, but here's what we need in light of that. Okay, the Battle of Shiloh is happening. Okay, but here's what we need in light of these things. He's fleshing it all out in beautiful primary source information from somebody capturing it as it is unfolding. But every single thread goes right back to slavery and put the black man in uniform. Don't just try to have this arbitrary idea that maybe freedom will come in the aftermath. Let a black man fight for his own freedom. The freedom given to us by white men would lose half its luster. It's better to die free, it is better to die free than live as slaves. His firm conviction, he's pushing and pushing and pushing, tearing into President Lincoln, now in office, who through these first 2 years, Douglass is saying like, we got the right first steps under you, but you're not leading with the right kind of moral conviction about what is at the heart of this. So he calls President Lincoln tardy, vacillating, hesitating. He's doing everything but accusing him of being a coward. Think, say what the war is really about, or we're never going to actually be able to do anything about what's going on. We're leaving millions of people, who many of whom would gladly go into uniform and risk lives in defense of that same flag. But you got to get to that point. And for 1861, 1862, Douglass, not a big fan of Lincoln, even as Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation and other things. Still a lot of hesitation of, is this just more political talk again? Is there going to be actual action that carries this stuff out? So it's a very complicated couple of years of Douglass preaching and teaching and writing, constantly saying, remember what the war is about. But so many politicians in and around the DC area, broad places, aren't particularly interested in at least doing anything about what Douglass is saying. But we do know they are absolutely hearing what he is saying. Again, this is one of the most famous people on the planet at the time period. And he has a massive journalistic reach. He's preaching his gospel of abolition through the war. Not everybody's trying to receive it, unless it's going to get to a point where maybe they won't have a choice but to receive it soon. But he's trying. And he's making some enemies in the process too, in politics as well.
So he's talking a lot about Lincoln, talking to Lincoln on using his soapbox and publications, but how does he actually meet Lincoln? And what type of relationship do they have, and how does that really evolve over time?
Sure. So he's going to meet Lincoln directly because of what happens to his two boys. So when the secondary Emancipation Proclamation is issued, the final one, among the changes that it had from the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation is it allowed Black men to now enlist in the military. And courtesy of that, Frederick is like, here we go. You know, we finally are getting to that point where we can allow, he says, why are we fighting this war with the soft white hand behind or in front of us, and we keep the iron grip of the black man strapped behind our backs? Pull out both fists and we can be slugging away simultaneously. So when this moment comes, Frederick immediately becomes a recruiter for the United States cause there. And among the things he's recruiting are two of his own boys, who are some of the first that he's going to put into some of these earliest regiments comprised of Black men. But where this connects with Abraham Lincoln, however, as Douglass's boys, Lewis and Charles, two of his three boys, are serving together, they take part in that famous event that we know from the movie Glory, you know, things, the attack on Fort Wagner. One of his boys, Lewis, is grievously wounded in that charge, goes back to hospitals, is going to spend months in treatment for one of the wounds that he's going to receive into his groin. And now Frederick Douglass, looking not just in kind of this broad sense of millions of Black men enlisting and serving valiantly, now it's his boy who is lingering in this hospital, who laid it all on the line, who had the bullets zipping around him, felt the canister balls, you know, ricocheting off the ground on all sides. My boy is fighting for his life, or possibly fighting for his life in this care facility. And then he looks around and says, how can I continue supporting such things? Because not only is my boy suffering, but he's doing it for less pay. He doesn't have the opportunity for promotions in the same way that others would in terms of serving as commissioned officers. And he also doesn't have that ability, were he to be captured as a prisoner of war, he wouldn't have the same exchange abilities courtesy of the policies that the Confederate Congress has instituted, that it will not recognize Black men in military uniform as soldiers for exchanges. How can I keep doing this? And so in the summer of 1863, Frederick Douglass announces he's done recruiting because Lincoln hasn't figured it out yet. They're still now putting all these extra lives on the line, just basically throwing them on front lines and not doing the necessary steps to protect or safeguard or give them the same freedoms that even comparative white soldiers would be facing these dangers, but at least you have a few extra bucks, if nothing else at the end. You know, if you prove yourself capable, you could maybe one day be a second lieutenant, a captain. You could rise up the ranks. You wouldn't, in theory, know you're spending the rest of your life in a POW camp if it came to that. But as Douglass is writing letters to people saying, we can't support this anymore, Lincoln still isn't getting it, and we're just exposing people to more types of abuse, and in some cases, maybe sending them back into slavery if they're getting captured here. A friend encourages him, why don't you just take your big mouthpiece that you have and go directly to President Lincoln? Go to the White House and see if you can get a meeting with him. And this is in the days when you didn't have, you know, it's not like the White House nowadays. You could just kind of show up, get into a room, and hope to get your opportunity. So in August of 1863, that's exactly what Frederick Douglass does. He shows up in Washington, comes down here, meets with some of his political friends here. One of his senators, who's going to be a senator from Kansas, is going to issue him this document that hopefully is going to serve as an introduction, get you in there. They get in, it's co-signed by the Postmaster General, it's co-signed by the Secretary of the Interior, all sorts of people adding their signatures trying to get Douglass into this room. And he steps into the White House, into this meeting area where there's tons of other people, almost exclusively other white men and women packed into that room. And as Douglass enters that room, he presents his name to one of Lincoln's secretaries. Secretary immediately vanishes behind the door where presumably the president is and comes right back out of that door and says, Mr. Douglass, the president will see you now. Lincoln knows who Frederick Douglass is. He knows he has one of the most powerful journalistic critics right here with him. But you can imagine as well on the side view, how a lot of the predominantly white folks in that meeting room felt about Frederick Douglass being ushered in ahead of many of them who had been waiting there beforehand. There are some very unfortunate things hollered out at Frederick as he goes in. People, again, trying to radicalize Lincoln in ways that Douglass wishes he was as radical as many folks are accusing Lincoln of being. And as soon as Douglass gets into the meeting with Lincoln, he tries to introduce himself. And Lincoln immediately stops him and says, "I know who you are, Mr. Douglass. I'm very glad to meet you." And these two men have an extremely animated conversation where Douglass is bringing up these key concerns of why he can't recruit. Again, unequal pay, no promotional opportunity, the POW conditions. But from this dialogue that I have, and I emphasize dialogue, Douglass walks away incredibly impressed with Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln gave him a lot of stuff back. He pushed back on many respects. He didn't agree or accept everything that Douglass had requested. But Douglass was very clear. Lincoln listened to me. He heard me. He didn't cut me off. He didn't give me, the 1 minute sort of thing to say my view, and then he completed his view on the subject and went with that. He heard out everything I had to say. And Douglass would add, I could tell he was deeply troubled at some of the things I said. They didn't walk in full agreement, but they walked away from that first meeting with a tremendous amount of respect for each other. Douglass was clear, I have been heard. And Lincoln tells him in this meeting, well, you are correct about the unequal pay. We're going to do something about that, but popular prejudice must have its place for a time. We'll get there. This stuff just takes time, so we got to move it. Again, politically, he may be correct on that. That's certainly not what Douglass wants to hear. So we're needing promotions. Lincoln kind of doing some political doublespeak here and says, I will sign any commendation that comes to me, any suggestion from the Secretary of War. If Edwin Stanton just gives me that recommendation, then I would be happy to make you or others a commissioned officer. Kind of passes that buck there. And he also says, there's not much I can do about the Confederate Congress's decision about prisoners of war. But Lincoln does give the strongest repudiation of Douglass. He says, well, you are calling for execution of Confederate POWs. He says, I'm not going to do that. If I could find the people responsible for murdering these black men and enslaving them and others, then absolutely, I would have them killed. But I can't justify murdering a random Confederate soldier in exchange for the one who committed this crime. Again, Douglass walks away and says, it's not exactly what I wanted, but this guy's starting to get it. When you layer on the Emancipation Proclamation and other things, that's their first of several meetings. They meet again almost exactly 1 year later in 1864. This time, Abraham Lincoln has invited Frederick Douglass to come to the White House. He invites him in August to join this because at this period in time, Abraham Lincoln does not believe that he is going to be reelected. He believes he's going to lose in that upcoming presidential election in 1864. And so he has a very private conversation he would like to have with Frederick Douglass with this idea in mind. And their meeting is the exact same week as something called the blind memo, which is this thing that Lincoln had his cabinet sign without reading that basically said, we are going to do everything we can to give a peaceful transition of power to the new administration. But in so doing, we will continue the war aims all the way to our last possible second in office. Again, he does not believe he's going to win. And so with Frederick Douglass now invited into his office, President Lincoln has what's maybe one of the more radical conversations he's ever going to have, hopefully off the record, that no one would ever know what they're talking about. Clearly, Douglass doesn't believe in off the record stuff too much, but he talks about everything. What Lincoln basically tells him is, I'm not going to be reelected. A new president is coming, and a president who probably has very different views than you and I related to now the centrality of slavery to this war. If that new president comes in, they're likely to enter some kind of a peace negotiation that allows for the continuation of slavery in the southern states. So between now, August of 1864, and inauguration day of that new president, March of 65, says, Frederick Douglass, I want you to go into the American South. You are to create a massive network of agents, and this is my language, not so much his, but basically create the Underground Railroad on steroids down there. Get every single enslaved person out of the southern states you possibly can between now and March 4th, 1865, until that next president takes that oath of office. Do whatever we can to dismantle the system, and you are in charge of this kind of half nationwide organization. Frederick is ecstatic by this idea. It's dangerous, it's hazardous, there's a lot of difficulty connected with setting up this huge underground network to smuggle dozens, hundreds, thousands, ideally millions out of the South in the next few months. But for Frederick, what's most important in this, even though as we know, this doesn't wind up happening because Lincoln wins the election. Frederick is firmly convinced now, if Lincoln is willing to do that, he gets it. He 100% gets what is at the essence of all of this. He's not even telling other members of his cabinet or things as far as we know about this plan. He's just dispatching me down there to create this huge network of folks. So no matter what's going to happen from this point forward, Lincoln is my man. And Douglas switches his vote in 1864. He wasn't planning to vote for Lincoln again, but now he's going to vote for Lincoln in the 1864 election. He's going to continue forward. And at that inauguration, there's this famous picture of Abraham Lincoln giving the inaugural address. And it's really difficult to see, but if you look very closely in that picture, you can also see Frederick Douglass in that picture. Front row, right in front of the president during the address. Douglass is there. And when the address is over, which Douglass says was more a sermon, he says he's one of the few people who was thundering with applause in the aftermath of the second inaugural address, because it talks about all the blood that had been borne by the lash. I'm not phrasing it exactly correctly. But shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, saying we've got to do this justice to make sure every ounce of suffering, maybe this is what God is requiring of the nation in this moment, is full justice for all the millions that have been brutalized across the decades. Douglass so thrilled that he knows it's his moment, and he's going to go meet with the president again after the inaugural events. Goes to the White House to go for an inaugural ball with President Lincoln on March 4th, 1865, where Frederick Douglass at first cannot get into the White House, the place he's been several times before, because DC police force is there and they are not going to admit a black man into the White House. Douglass tries doing these sorts of things of, oh, I know the president, the president would be like, yeah, of course, you know the president, sure you do, like you're not getting in the White House. That's just not how things work around here, kind of that reinforcing of the traditional stereotypes and roles. Eventually, Douglass gets his way in when he sees a friend of his going through the hall, and he calls out to him, tell the president that Fred Douglass is stuck outside. Douglass gets in, goes into the East Room of the White House, where President Lincoln is there mingling, shaking hands, and an amazing moment unfolds now for their third in-person meeting. I don't know if, like in a movie, literally, the spotlight shined on him and the crowd parted, but kind of that scene unfolds here. Douglass enters the room, and Lincoln, in the midst of greeting folks, calls out, "Here's my friend Douglass. I saw you in the crowd today, watching my address. I want to know what you thought of it." And as Douglass goes up, they shake hands, have this brief encounter. Every single eye in that room is on the two of them. Because all those people who want to have influence amongst the president, probably part of why they're there, hoping to get a little more face time, shake the palm of him. He just stopped everyone and said, "This is Douglass. I want him first and foremost." And when he asked Douglass his opinion on the speech, Frederick Douglass kind of demurs, says, "Oh, I don't want to waste your time. There's a lot of people who want to talk to you." And Lincoln says a transformative comment to Frederick Douglass in this moment. He says, "You must stop a little, Douglass, for there is no man in this nation whose opinion I value more than yours. I want to know what you thought of my speech." To which Frederick Douglass, I imagine if you're in this room, you probably heard a pin drop. Because all those folks wanted to be the one giving their opinions, no doubt, to Abraham Lincoln. He says, "There's not a single one of these people or anywhere whose opinion I care about as much as you." And Douglass replies, "Mr. President, that was a sacred effort." And that is the last time these two men see each other. They will part ways shortly thereafter. Again, the events of the assassination and other things will unfold in a little over a month from there. Again, Douglass firmly convinced this now president, reelected with hopefully 4 more years, he's got this figured out now. We're doing everything right. He's going to prosecute this war to victory, and hopefully, with me, Douglass, perhaps by his side, we can make a lot of stuff transform in what's coming this Reconstruction period. But as we know, that's not quite how history plays out with the events. Very quickly, whatever Lincoln's dream may or may not have been, we don't know. But Douglass, I wouldn't call them friends so much. Sometimes that word gets used, but they are definitely very powerful acquaintances who have a tremendous amount of mutual respect for each other by 64 and by 65, though it hasn't always been that way. And you just wonder, as that relationship keeps cementing itself, where it might have gone. In the future, we'll never know. It's pure speculation. But Douglass is confident Lincoln has really evolved in just these 4 years. How much further is he going to evolve in 4 more years till the end of his second term? History steps in, though, and takes that question away from Douglass, which he believes is one of those great what ifs in American history, looking back later. What if my buddy, the president, was able to have that full second term, and maybe a third term, who knows, beyond what could have come from there. very, very interesting dynamics he has with President Lincoln. Let's be very clear, only 3 in-person meetings with each other: August of 63, August of 64, and March of 65. And if you ever look at that inaugural picture again of Lincoln, try to find Frederick Douglass in it. You scan the crowd, it's hard to see, but look for the guy who has the most amazing hair in the crowd. And that's where you will always find Frederick Douglass, where the amazing hair is.
Oh, wow. So that is an amazing relationship. And thinking they've only met 3 times. But you mentioned at the first meeting that they had that Douglass was kind of disillusioned with how things were going, and his work with recruiting soldiers had really stopped at that point. So why, at that point, did Douglass believe that military service was important? And did his relationship with Lincoln kind of change how he looked at recruitment and service during the war?
Yeah, Douglass absolutely recognizes that military service is critical. As he sees it, he makes a statement, which sometimes I'll partially paraphrase because I don't remember the whole thing. Because if you get the eagle on your chest, that cartridge box, if you get the button with the flag on your jacket, if you have the musket in your arms, there is no force on this earth that can deny that you are also therefore a citizen of the United States. So he is firmly convicted that military service equals citizenship. And it's impossible to roll the wheels back from military service. And as we'll see, it's not always that easy as the journey goes, but he's fully convinced those who lay their lives on the line are guaranteed citizens, and that citizenship cannot be rejected in any way, shape, or form. So his encouragement, if we serve first and lay down and bleed and die and fight valiantly, no matter how many it is, that is going to then include citizenship for all. That is then going to extend to voting rights. That is going to extend to property rights and all this other stuff that some people in America just kind of seemingly received at the moment of their birth. He says, we can prove all of this on a battlefield. And that is why he is so desperate to get as many Black men into the military as he possibly can. Because he believes this is not to say that it's a negotiating point, but in a sense, recognizing their valor also gives a stronger post-war conversational point to launch from. That look how many men laid it all on the line. Look at the 36,000 who died in those services. Look at the volumes of Black men who received the Medal of Honor. He says, look at all of this, and then tell us that not only are we not men, that we are not Americans, that we do not then have the right to vote for those who affect our future military, economic, political life. For Douglass, military service is everything. So while he himself never serves, he desperately is getting everyone he possibly can into the military. And part of the reason he doesn't serve is, I didn't mention this, but when he meets with Edwin Stanton in April in his 63 visits there, Edwin Stanton promises Douglass that he's going to commission him to be an officer in the United States Army, that he would be the first Black man to serve as a commissioned officer. So Douglass goes back home to Rochester, ready for his commission, shuts down his newspaper, packs up everything that he had in life in order to receive his commission. He's just waiting on it to come, but it never comes. It never comes. And when he petitions for it, he receives back a message from the Secretary of War saying, well, still report down to Mississippi anyway, and you'll go on to the staff of General Lorenzo Thomas. And Douglass is looking at that saying, but no commission. I'm not going down to the South without a commission. He knows the target that he would have, and he's not just going to be, in his view, right or wrong, he doesn't just want to be a private in the line, receiving orders from others. And I feel like going down there, I'm going to be target number 1. And so he's not able to personally come over, no matter how you would describe what's going on there, whether it's knowledge of what he believes his future would be, arrogance, other things as folks might describe it. He doesn't enlist or serve personally, but he does accompany so many thousands of men joining it and sees his role. You fight with muskets, and I will fight by your side with the very politicians to make sure your muskets are loaded, they are cleaned, they are prepared, your families are cared for. That is my role, because military service, again, this theme is everything in the future of America. And again, sadly, he's not the first or last generation to have some of those same beliefs or fight those same battles again the moment the treaties or the wars are over. But Douglass thinks this is our shot again. And part of what he's concerned about when the war is ending, maybe it wasn't quite bloody enough to really have the full opportunity. And it's staggering to say that about the most violent war in American history. They're saying, maybe we need a little bit more blood for the military value of those black men to really be cemented in the undeniable ways in this post-war period. Douglass is fighting hard, using, as he says, my pen, my voice, and my vote are his famous weapons. And as somebody detracts him, maybe one last thing I'll say on this front, somebody who's detracting on Douglass, connecting back to his John Brown connections and others, calling him a coward because you didn't serve in the military, you didn't go off, you didn't fight with John Brown, even though you knew what he was doing. And Douglass says, I've always been more famous for running and speaking than for fighting. And so he's going to continue running across the globe and speaking, but not directly engaging in military confrontation, while having no hesitation with others engaging in that. And anything he can do to shatter those barriers, he's all for. And spend the rest of his life working on that, even after the war, still working for the roles of black men in the military in those post-war years too.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much. Since we are coming towards the end of time, we have time for questions from the audience. We do have a few coming into the Zoom, so I can take some of those. I'll start with the first question that came in. Did Douglass and Lincoln write letters to each other? And if so, were they ever published?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no letter correspondence between the two of them that I know about. So a lot of what we have, I won't even say a lot of, almost entirely what we have for their meetings is Frederick Douglass's recollection of it. Lincoln, as far as we know, did not write about their encounters. However, Douglass, I think we can give a lot of credibility to what he says here, because not only does he write several versions of his encounters across the years, versions which line up really well with each other, he's also on stages over those same days after his meeting with Lincoln, telling others about his conversations. And so many of the details of these things all line up one with another. So you'd feel like if someone was kind of twisting some facts a little bit, especially spanning across decades of telling the same story, you'd have a little deviation in it. But all the key threads are sometimes even the exact quotes that he gives are lining up perfectly. So no letters that exist, to the best of my knowledge, between the two of them. But again, tons of Douglass talking about Lincoln in his editorials and his periodicals.
So any questions in the room?
Yeah, just two questions. One is, you talked about black soldiers. So black soldiers were allowed to enlist after the second emancipation proclamation. By that point, a lot of the enlistments of white soldiers were running out. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact that black soldiers had towards the end of the war? Second question is, you mentioned Douglass in the UK. I know that Britain seriously considered intervening in the war on the side of the Confederacy. Did Douglass's time in the UK, granted it was before that, did that influence British thinking not to intervene on behalf of the Confederacy?
For the people on Zoom, I'll repeat the questions. I'll do the first one, I guess. The first question is, can you expound more on the impact of black soldiers at the end of the war?
Yeah, so when Douglass is going to help enlist coming from this Emancipation Proclamation, once the official version of it is in place, Douglass is seeing that, as well as you well noted, with expirations of many of the white soldiers who had enlisted early in the war, that's coming up. There's a massive need for manpower, fundamentally, no matter who it is, to enter the federal cause. This hopefully is going to be a major proving point, not just with black men joining other veterans who have already been serving, but with taking increasingly important roles in that temporarily shrinking army, at least in terms of experienced soldiers. Not to say the army is disappearing by any stretch. So Douglass sees a disproportionately powerful role black men in military could play because of this perfect confluence of the moment to stand for ourselves and a moment when some other white soldiers are walking away because of faithful service that they have accorded and survived for. Douglass also believes there's the opportunity here as a counterpoint to some of that of saying, you enlist for a certain period of time and you are certainly entitled to walk away when you fulfill that enlistment. That is a right of everyone, but his conviction, I don't know how many black men would walk away from this thing undone until it is done fully and totally, knowing we are going to be a rock solid force that is going to take it to the Confederacy with everything we possibly have. And increasingly in those growing battles and campaigns in 64 and 65, you recurringly find units of black men at the front, sometimes leading valiantly, sometimes caught in situations that, as we would construct it later, are very unfortunate situations that they found themselves in because of that commitment to not just be serving as labor forces or things behind the scenes, but to be front and center and a tremendous amount of pride in being that front and center moment. I think one of those great kind of bring everything together moments is on the fields of Appomattox, Virginia, as Robert E. Lee ultimately is about to surrender. One of those final breakthrough attempts that he's contemplating achieving there is going to be stopped by a line of Union black soldiers, several regiments of them deployed. Just right there, the ultimate sign, kind of right there, of so much of what the Confederacy was resisting and fighting against. Not only basic recognition of black men, but employing them in military units. And now at least one of those fronts of what Lee had hoped would be a breakout for his army is just a wall of heavily armed black men firing right back at him, saying, oh no, you stand right here in Appomattox Courthouse. You're not getting out this time. Such powerful roles that these freedom fighters are going to evoke. Often far more than is even celebrated now. It is still the narrative surrounding black units or United States colored troops, and there still does not get placed central in the story in the same way that it is entitled to, in the same way that Douglass and others are hoping that it will be. As Douglass is going to say, basically, we won the war with about roughly 180,000 black men into the Army, another maybe 20, 25,000 into the Navy, laying down their lives by tens of thousands, suffering these wounds, being captured, all of this for less pay and the no promotional opportunity, at least to a point in time, says America is going to owe us all a big debt of gratitude in the aftermath of this thing. We proved it, and we are continuing to prove it. Again, post-war period is a different beast entirely. And going to the second question he had posed here about Douglass's time in the United Kingdom, some of his efforts there, did any of that influence involvement from England or the British Isles into the Confederate experience? Nothing that I know of is going to be connected, at least that you could trace directly. You could argue perhaps some kind of broader thematic influence, but Douglass's last visit there was in that early spring of 1860 before he left. And so by that point, he may have had some influence on some circles, but I can't imagine Douglass was a particularly powerful political voice in some of the questions of which European nations will or will not step into this.
All right, so we do have another question on Zoom, and that is, would you be able to briefly outline the difference in the Republican and Democratic politics of the day at that election of 1860?
That is a very complex question, but yeah. But again, as they well placed in here, briefly explained. So I will do my best to not go full Douglass in 2.5 hours on this. So very simply, and I see so much through the lens of Frederick Douglass as we talk about these events. And with Frederick Douglass, the fundamental difference between the two parties is slavery, is racism, and a fundamental belief in what is the priority for America. Frederick Douglass recognizes that the Republican Party is not ideal. It is not perfect. It's saying some of the right language around dismantling slavery, but whether it's actually going to carry that out or not, he's not 100% convinced or sure. What he is 100% convinced of is the Democratic Party is all in on slavery. It is connected with all of their political structure and system and power and elections. And so though there's a lot of nuance in tariffs and taxes and all these other things that get in between it, as far as Frederick Douglass is concerned, and honestly, I think as far as most folks, or not most folks, I will say as far as a significant amount of folks with that 1860 election in mind, it's all circling back to the role of slavery, racism, white supremacy in America. And for Douglass, he'll say it has to be the Republican path forward, because even if that's not ideal, the Democratic path forward is terrifying for what that path might be. And given a choice between a worst case scenario and a not quite as far as you want it, you got to go with the not quite as far as you want it and give that your full force out of fear, because just trying to prove some moral point to someone who says, see, you should have gone further, that's why we didn't vote for it, says that alternative is, that's awful. And that's going to jeopardize millions more lives here. So again, I know the question's maybe not exactly what you went looking for there, but fundamentally, racism and slavery is how Douglass views the difference between the Democratic and the Republican parties of 1860.
All right, and so our next question is, do you know where most of the Douglass papers are published today?
So there's several collections of Douglass's paper that exist in various archives. The biggest single published version is put together by a guy named Blassingame, and it's just called the Frederick Douglass Papers. And it is multiple volumes. I think if I remember right, it's either 5 or 6 volumes, and it's basically just about every speech he ever gave, essentially piled together either in his words by a stenographer who was in the room or by constructing from newspaper accounts from those who witnessed it. It is super detailed. It'll take you to places that you will not find in any of the biographies and stuff, but it is really kind of specific and niche, and it's really expensive too, unfortunately, but check your local library. It's by a guy named again Blassingame. It's got the Frederick Douglass Papers, the biggest published resource, but you'll find a lot of his papers digitized online, various places. Library of Congress has several. We at the National Park Service have many others, as well as some private repositories and schools that have excellent archives too. His papers are all over the place.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions in the room?
Did his wife have any influence or backing that helped him make decisions or any other part of whatever?
Sure. So the question for those on Zoom is, what was the influence of his wife, or did she have any influence on his political decisions?
Yes, so thank you for bringing her up. His wife's name is Anna Murray Douglass. And I think it's safe to say, if it wasn't for Anna Murray Douglass, none of us would have ever heard of Frederick Douglass. She is born a freedwoman in the state of Maryland while Frederick is enslaved. She is the one who not only connects with him while he's enslaved, but fundraises and sells many of her personal belongings in order to pay for ultimately his escape attempt, with having no guarantees of who he's going to be in the future. Just knowing I've got one person caught in evil that I can do something about, and she does it. And that allows him to take that journey. They marry shortly after. He and Anna are married for 44 years before Anna will pass away in 1882, before Frederick does. But unfortunately, there is very little that we know about Anna Murray, which is shocking given who she's married to and the very public life that Frederick Douglass lived. In his nearly 1,300 pages of autobiographical writings, he only mentions her by name, I believe it's 2 times. In those very quick references, she herself, for reasons that we will never fully understand, was never able to read or write. So she left no letters or journals or things in her own words. Now others sometimes put things in her language, and maybe that's what she said, and maybe they were putting other things in. Anna was a fiercely private person. She almost never traveled with Douglass. The only time, I think the only time she actually traveled with him is in 1863, because she wants to go see their boys off to war as well. And they go off to watch that ship launched out, carrying their 2 boys out in uniform. That's a moment where she will travel. But otherwise, as frustrating as it is for us, Anna, a driving force in the Underground Railroad work and others, is left much more silent in the story than we would like to have happen. So I believe it's safe to say she probably had a whole lot more influence and involvement on Frederick Douglass than we know. We just can't know for sure, because he doesn't really talk about her. The kids don't talk about her very much. Their daughter Rosetta does give a few pages describing her mom. And Anna is not allowed to talk in terms of the written word for herself. It's a lot we don't know. And to add one quick follow-up to that, after Anna's death, Frederick does remarry to a second woman named Helen Pitts Douglass, who he's married to for the rest of his life. She is fully literate, and we know she is deeply engaged in a lot of his work. It's part of how they met anyway. She was already in activism before their marriage. So she certainly has a lot of influence and involvement in his journey. It would not surprise me to know that Anna did as well. Again, we just can't prove it as well for Anna as we can for his second wife, Helen.
All right, thank you. And one last question before we wrap it up.
So post-war, we had Reconstruction in the South, and we had the Indian War going on in the West, and Black soldiers played major roles in both of those. How did Frederick Douglass, was he involved in shaping that at all? Was he politically involved?
So was Frederick Douglass politically involved with soldiers after the war?
So not as heavily being involved with soldiers after the war. Because when the war ends, Frederick Douglass certainly recognized, as you say, with those other wars and combat and things going on with indigenous tribes around us, that Frederick sees there's going to continue to be violence in this broader sense of expansion of America, or, forcing others down. And Black men are going to play a pivotal role in that, the rise of the Buffalo Soldiers and others. But when the war ends, Frederick sees his biggest role now is making sure that everything the war was fought about is carried out politically, especially with Abraham Lincoln out of the picture. He knows, I need to pour my heart and my soul into American politics in a new way. Because Andrew Johnson is a very different guy than Abraham Lincoln was. And in Douglass's first encounter with Andrew Johnson, when they make eye contact, Douglass says to a friend who's next to him, says, whatever Andrew Johnson may be, he is no friend of our people. But yet, that's the new president. He says, that is going to be a far more important battle that I have to fight with a new chief executive who does not have the same background of exploration and conversation that I've had with Lincoln. We're going to have a lot of problems. And as history will reveal with Frederick Douglass, he's going to have a lot of problems with Andrew Johnson. He focuses on trying to become kind of this new generation of a founding parent of a new America. We got a chance to get it right this time, hopefully. But can we make it happen? And so as military service continues going on, Douglass believing, I've got to sit in the White House, the Capitol building, battle with the Supreme Court, all this stuff. That's where my voice is most useful right now, is on the political battlefield.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin Bryant, for the presentation today. It was wonderful. I actually have one final question for you because it was so great to learn about Frederick Douglass. And my question is, the Frederick Douglass House still open? Is it open, and when can we come visit to learn more?
Absolutely. We would love for you to come by the Frederick Douglass House. It's in the Anacostia neighborhood of Washington, D.C. However, I say this hesitantly because the home is closed at the moment. It will be reopening soon. There's been some ongoing renovations that have happened to close for COVID-related things. And then when time came to reopen, and that funding came through to secure some of the much necessary work. So it stayed closed longer than we had hoped for. But while we do not have a date, keep watching very closely because we are weeks away, ideally, a couple months at most. This home will be reopened in the summer of 2023 at some point in time, if not still in the spring of 2023. So we'll be back soon. You can come see us. And this home of Frederick Douglass, one last thing, it is his final home. He lived his last 18 years there. And the truly breathtaking thing about this home is inside of it, almost every single item in the home was his, belonged to the family. And this includes things that connect to what we've talked about. In his home, he kept some of the muskets that his kids had used in the war. He kept pikes that John Brown had used in Harper's Ferry. So many amazing things featured around. It's an amazing archive in his life and further amplifying by what we have today. So it will be open soon, but not quite yet. It is not. So no aspect of it is open at present.
So hopefully soon we'll get a chance this summer to go see the Frederick Douglass House and to learn more. Thank you everyone for joining us in the room, and for those of you who are visiting us virtually,